The moment they tore through my gates on those roaring motorcycles, I knew something was wrong. Dust clouds churned up from my ranch road, panicked horses bucked in their pens, and my cattle scattered in a frenzy. Then I saw them, 10 men in black riot gear, all with HOA compliance division stitched across their backs. They pointed their weapons, yes, actual rifles, at me, shouted commands like they were DA agents, and screamed that my ranch was too dirty for the neighborhood's standards. One even took aim at my old dog, Duke. I hadn't been this close to violence since Afghanistan. And now, these clowns thought they could intimidate a retired Delta Force commander? What were they thinking? Stick around because the story only gets crazier. They say there's no peace like the kind you find at sunrise on your own land. That's exactly what I was doing the morning all hell started its slow creep into my life, sitting on my porch, sipping coffee, watching the mist roll across the pasture as the first rays of sun kissed the horizon. My name's Mason Brooks, and I'm not your average retiree. I spent over 20 years serving this country in the most elite unit Uncle Sam has to offer, Delta Force. I've seen combat zones from Kandahar to Mogadishu, and when I finally put down the rifle and picked up a feed bucket, I thought I'd found the kind of peace only hard-earned scars and blood-soaked boots could teach you to appreciate. I bought this ranch 5 years ago, 40 acres of rolling hills, cattle pasture, horse stables, and a barn I rebuilt board by board with my own 2 hands. My only neighbors were a couple ranchers a mile or 2 down the dirt road and a few city folks who'd bought up plots nearby and decided they liked playing cowboy on the weekends. One of those plots became the center of the nightmare. It had been sold to a development firm that turned it into a gated rustic luxury community they called Whispering Pines Estates. A name as fake and phony as the people it attracted. It was all perfectly manicured lawns, prefab farmhouses, wine tastings, and polo shirts. And, of course, it came with a freshly minted HOA headed by none other than the queen of petty suburban tyranny herself, Karen Whitmore. If someone tried to genetically engineer the most insufferable HOA president in existence, they'd still fall short of Karen. She was in her mid-50s, wore big sunglasses even on cloudy days, and strutted around like a 4-star general at a homeowner's parade. She wasn't just nosy, she was obsessed. The moment she realized her little HOA backed up against my property line, she decided that made me part of her kingdom. She started with letters. Neatly typed, bullet-pointed, and delivered in gold-trimmed envelopes. Mr. Brooks, your perimeter fence is not painted in HOA-approved neutral earth tones. Your barn is visible from our jogging trail and does not adhere to our rustic design aesthetic. Several residents have expressed concern regarding the visual disorder of your livestock pens. I laughed at the first few and tossed them into the fire pit. I figured she was just playing power games with the folks inside her little step-forward community. But then the letters turned into visits. Karen showed up at my front gate, clipboard in hand, and buzzed the intercom like she was collecting census data from behind enemy lines. The first time I answered, she greeted me with a plastic smile and said, "Mr. Brooks, as the president of the Whispering Pines HOA, I wanted to personally extend a courtesy reminder that our community holds high standards for all neighboring properties. We're happy to help you come into compliance." I told her kindly, and I stressed kindly, that she could take her clipboard and shove it somewhere shady. But Karen didn't like being told no. Over the next few weeks, her tone changed. She started snapping pictures from just outside my fence line. I caught her flying a drone over my property, hovering over my barn and my livestock like she was planning a tactical strike. Once I came home from the feed store and found one of her HOA minions, some guy with khakis and a GoPro, poking around my back pasture. I don't know what he was hoping to find, but what he did find was the barrel of a double-barrel shotgun and a polite invitation to get the hell off my land. I filed a trespassing report with the county, but that didn't seem to slow her down. Then came the citations. Not legal citations, mind you, just HOA violations that she taped to my gate in fancy envelopes listing everything from the unacceptable accumulation of mud on livestock hooves to the odor emanating from the manure compost area. I kid you not, one of her complaints was that my cows mooed too loud during her yoga class. I figured at some point the woman would get tired and move on, but Karen had found her dragon to slay. And worse, she had started spreading rumors among her community that my ranch was a health hazard, a blight on their property values, and my personal favorite, that my compost pile was releasing toxins that caused seasonal allergies. It was absurd. Still, I tried to let it go. I didn't want to escalate things. I'd had enough conflict for 2 lifetimes, and all I wanted was peace. I went about my business, fixing fences, feeding the horses, minding my land. But the whispers grew louder, and suddenly I started noticing unfamiliar cars driving slowly past my property, windows down, cameras out. I installed new security cameras. I reinforced the perimeter. I made sure every inch of my land was posted with no trespassing signs. But deep down I could feel it. The air was shifting. This wasn't just some HOA nitpicking me over property aesthetics. Karen had convinced herself that I was a threat to her little kingdom. I later learned that she'd told her HOA board I was a militia type, a dangerous man with combat training who kept weapons-grade equipment on site. I mean, she wasn't completely wrong about the training, but the rest was delusional fantasy. Still, it explained why one of her board members asked me, dead serious, if I was storing RPGs in my barn. And yet, I kept letting it slide. Until the day she brought her demands right up to my front door. I was in the middle of branding some new calves when I heard the crunch of gravel. I walked around the side of the barn to see Karen's brand new Cadillac SUV parked just outside the gate, with two men in black uniforms standing beside it. Big burly types, buzz cuts, matching badges stitched to their sleeves that read Whispering Pines Compliance Division. One of them was holding a damn body camera like he was filming a reality show. I walked up slow, wiping my hands on a rag, and asked, "Can I help you?" Karen stepped forward like she was leading a SWAT team into a meth lab. "Mr. Brooks, we are here to conduct a formal inspection of your property. You've been cited for multiple Category 4 violations under HOA subsection B of Rural Adjacency Protocol." I blinked. "Karen, this is private property. You don't have jurisdiction here. And you sure as hell don't have the right to bring hired goons onto my land." She smiled too wide. "Your property directly borders the HOA district and therefore falls under our extended perimeter ordinance. You are required to maintain visual and olfactory compliance." I took a long breath. "You've got 10 seconds to get off my land before I make this real unpleasant." One of the uniformed guys shifted his stance, hand drifting toward what looked a lot like a sidearm. And that's when I felt it, that deep, old part of me stir. The part trained to recognize threats, calculate distances, and neutralize problems. But I held back. Barely. Karen gave me a final look, full of contempt, and said, "We'll be back. With official enforcement." Then she turned on her heels and the three of them climbed into the SUV and drove off, tires kicking up dust like a warning shot. I stood there in the fading sun, hands still clenched around the rag, heart beating slower now. Something in her tone told me this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And that night, as I stood on my porch watching the moonlight dance across the fields, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen wasn't just trying to annoy me anymore. She was planning something. Something bigger. Something dangerous. And the next time she came to my ranch, she wouldn't be bringing clipboards and cameras. She'd be bringing a war. What she didn't realize, what she couldn't realize, was that I'd already fought mine. And I don't lose. It started at dawn. The kind of dawn that paints the world in warm gold, tricking you into thinking it's just another ordinary day. I was feeding the horses, same as always, working my way down the row of stalls when the distant rumble reached my ears. At first, I thought it was thunder, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. Then I heard the high-pitched whine, like chainsaws mixed with sirens, and the distinct roar of motorcycle engines echoing off the hills. I dropped the feed bucket and stepped outside the barn just in time to see them coming down the long dirt road toward my property, black-clad riders on matte black motorcycles, tearing through the dust like something out of a third-rate action movie. They were 10 deep, helmets on, faces covered, all of them dressed in tactical gear with big white letters on their backs that read, HOA Compliance Division. At the head of the pack rode a guy with a radio headset and a utility vest so stuffed with gear he looked like he was headed to Fallujah. And right behind him, in her pristine white SUV, was Karen. Her window was down, her sunglasses were on, and she had the look of someone arriving to claim a kingdom. I stood by the fence, arms crossed, my old dog Duke growling low beside me. The cattle had already scattered, spooked by the noise, and the horses in the stables were kicking at their stalls in a frenzy. I wasn't armed yet, but I didn't need to be. I'd read the situation before they even dismounted. These weren't cops. They weren't even rent-a-cops. They were wannabes, weekend warriors playing soldier, trying to intimidate me with numbers and noise. But they didn't realize that intimidation only works on the unprepared. And I don't do unprepared. They came to a stop in a wide semicircle, tires skidding in the dirt. One of them revved his engine for effect. Another pointed a rifle, yes, a rifle, toward the barn. Karen stepped out of her SUV like a pageant queen at a war rally and called out, "Mason Brooks, you are in violation of Whispering Pines Covenant Article 9, Property Neglect and Environmental Contamination." I didn't move. "You brought rifles to issue a landscaping citation?" She ignored me. Your continued refusal to comply has left the HOA no choice but to execute a code black enforcement action. I raised an eyebrow. Code black? Is that before or after code you've lost your damn mind? That didn't sit well. One of her jackboots dismounted and shouted, "Drop your tools. Put your hands where we can see them." I smiled. Tools? Son, I've got a bail hook and a half-empty coffee mug. You planning to take me down with that? Karen stepped forward now, holding some laminated folder like it was a badge. This is a legally sanctioned operation under Section C of the HOA Authority Charter. We are authorized to remove hazards, detain non-compliant individuals, and secure the property for public health. Then she said the words that made the air turn cold, "That includes livestock." I felt it hit me like a good punch. Say that again. Your animals, she said, nose wrinkling like she smelled something foul, are unsanitary and disruptive. They are being seized for relocation to a compliant facility. If you resist, we have authority to neutralize. That's when I saw it, one of her jackboots leveling his rifle at my horse pen. Duke barked, a deep angry growl, and Karen flinched. If that animal attacks, we're authorized to shoot, she snapped. I raised a hand, calm and slow. Easy now. You shoot my dog and this whole thing ends before it starts. One of the others, a shorter guy with a shaky grip, yelled, "Sir, get on the ground." But I wasn't listening. I was watching the whole picture unfold. Karen, puffed up with authority, her militia buzzing with nervous energy, none of them expecting resistance. They thought they were the wolves. They had no idea they'd wandered onto the land of a damn lion. Then it escalated. One of them fired a warning shot into the air. The horses screamed and bolted in their stalls. A few of the cows crashed through the lower gate, stampeding across the field. Duke lunged forward, barking like hell, and the guy with the rifle flinched, then aimed at him. That's when I moved. I dropped low and swept Duke behind me, then charged forward faster than any of them expected. I was in front of the nearest jackboot before he could raise his weapon, yanked the rifle from his hands, and slammed the butt into his chest hard enough to knock the air out of him. The others turned, shocked. Karen screamed. "Do not engage," she yelled, but it was too late. One of them fired again, this time at the air, but too close to the barn. The sound spooked the rest of the horses, and one kicked through the stall door. A moment later, a chestnut mare galloped out into the open, hooves thundering as she tore across the yard. Total chaos. I spun and used the rifle like a staff, keeping distance between me and the others while backing toward the porch. I didn't want a firefight. Not yet. I just needed time. I shouted over the noise, "You're trespassing on private property. This is armed invasion. You're done." Karen grabbed a megaphone, because of course she did, and yelled, "This is a community intervention. You are resisting peaceful compliance." Another guy, beefy with a crew cut, stepped forward, aiming squarely at me. "Drop the weapon and submit or we'll open fire." That's when I saw Duke again circling behind him. He let out a deep snarl and the guy spun, startled, which was all the time I needed. I kicked the side of the porch post, triggering the makeshift alarm system I'd rigged months ago. Sirens shrieked from the barn roof, floodlights flicked on, and a loud pre-recorded voice began blaring. "Trespassers will be prosecuted. Stand down and exit the premises immediately." It wasn't military grade, but it got the job done. The jackboots hesitated, eyes wide, some looking to Karen for orders. But Karen wasn't talking, she was backing toward her SUV, her face drained of color, clutching her megaphone like a security blanket. I kept the rifle lowered but ready. "You've got one chance to leave. Get off my land or you'll find out what a real compliance division looks like." One of them dropped his gear and ran. Another followed. Pretty soon, half of them were gone, leaving behind a trail of dust and dropped gear. Karen yelled, "Retreat. Regroup at the clubhouse." Then she slammed her SUV into reverse and peeled out, nearly running over one of her own men in the process. Within 5 minutes, they were all gone. Silence fell. The horses were still snorting and stomping in the paddocks, but no shots rang out, no orders were barked. Just the wind and the distant sound of tires fading into the distance. I stood there for a long moment, breathing slow, waiting for the adrenaline to fade. Duke leaned against my leg, still growling low. "Easy, boy," I whispered. "It's over." At least, I thought it was. But inside, I knew better. That wasn't just a tantrum. That was a test run. Karen had brought her little army to my land, tried to seize my animals, and pointed guns at a combat vet. That wasn't HOA enforcement. That was an act of war. And next time, they wouldn't come with warnings. Next time, they'd come to finish what they started. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that I'd already started preparing. I'd seen war. I knew how to plan for it. And if Karen Whitmore wanted a battle over some dirt, some cows, and a handful of manure piles, Well, she just kicked the wrong hornet's nest. Next time, I'd be ready. And next time, no one would walk away smiling. By the time the dust had settled from the so-called HOA raid, I knew there was no going back to normal. You don't point rifles at a man, threaten his animals, and try to hijack his land, then expect him to mow the lawn and smile at the next community barbecue. No, Karen Whitmore had declared war, and I wasn't going to win it by swinging a shovel or barking at her soldiers from across a fence. I was going to win it the way real soldiers do, with intel, strategy, patience, and precision. The first thing I did was call in a few favors from old friends. I wasn't the only one from Delta who'd hung up the uniform and gone civilian. Some guys started security companies, others went into law enforcement, and a few, like my buddy Reese, became legal sharks who specialized in exposing dirty nonprofits and corrupt homeowner associations. I called Reese that night, gave him the rundown, and after a long pause, he just said, "You're kidding me. They sent an armed squad? You've got to be kidding." I wasn't. And when I sent him the photos from my porch cameras, 10 guys in black tactical gear with HOA patches, rifles drawn, and Karen leading the charge like she was Cleopatra riding into Rome, he got real quiet. "All right," he said. "Let's ruin them." Step 1 was gathering everything. Every notice Karen had ever sent, every envelope I hadn't burned, every photo, every bit of footage. I even dusted off an old hard drive from the barn's security system and downloaded 6 months' worth of motion-activated clips. There she was, over and over again, trespassing, flying drones, filming livestock, snapping photos of cow dung like it was evidence in a criminal trial. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed to understand what Whispering Pines HOA really was under the hood. So I started digging. I spent a whole weekend cross-referencing property records, board filings, and tax documents. Karen had always painted the HOA as a purely volunteer-run community group, but Reese warned me that most HOAs these days are just the public face of shady property management groups with something to gain. Sure enough, I found out that Whispering Pines wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a holding zone for a shell corporation called Clearwater Habitat Management. The twist? Clearwater was run by Karen's brother-in-law. He was on record as the founder, but Karen was listed as chief compliance consultant. And get this, they were collecting $900 per home per quarter in HOA dues with an annual compliance budget of nearly $1.2 million. That money wasn't going into neighborhood beautification. It was going into vehicles, gear, and training for her little HOA army. She was stockpiling cash to fund her own private enforcement division, all under the guise of community safety. I found invoices for tactical vests, crowd control batons, surveillance equipment, and one that really made my blood run cold, livestock containment kits, rapid neutralization equipment. She wasn't bluffing when she threatened to seize my animals. She had plans. And worse, funding. I started putting together a dossier. It wasn't just about stopping Karen. It was about exposing her. I documented every financial misappropriation, every violation of state law, every forged ordinance. Meanwhile, Reese was busy reaching out to people on the inside. HOA board members, residents of Whispering Pines, even former employees of Clearwater. Some were tight-lipped. Others were eager to talk. Apparently, Karen had pissed off more people than I realized. There was one woman, Holly, who used to be on the HOA advisory board. She reached out anonymously at first, then agreed to meet. She showed up at my ranch in a plain Toyota and wore sunglasses like she was entering witness protection. We sat on the porch and she spilled everything. Karen had forced through new bylaws without a vote. She'd authorized routine neighborhood patrols with weapons, some real, some airsoft, and used HOA funds to build a compliance center in a rented office trailer behind the clubhouse. Her so-called raids weren't the first. She'd already run off 3 homeowners for minor infractions, one for having unauthorized chickens, another for painting a mailbox blue. But no one had fought back. Until me. "You scared her," Holly said. "You stood up to her in front of the board, in front of the officers. She's unraveling, but that just makes her more dangerous." I nodded slowly. "She'll come again." "Yeah," Holly said. "But this time she's not going to ask." That night, I walked the perimeter of my property with Duke. I installed new motion sensors, set up floodlights with infrared triggers, and dug out an old satellite rig I used to run recon ops in the mountains. It still worked. I pointed the dish straight at the clubhouse and started intercepting comms. Nothing illegal, just radio chatter. But it was enough to tell me she was still organizing her division, still running drills, still planning. I heard one guy say Brooks has military training. We can't just go in without overwhelming force. Another said Karen wants to make an example of him. My blood ran cold. She wasn't backing down. She was escalating. So I escalated too. I reached out to the sheriff's department. I didn't call 911. I called the sheriff himself, John Evers. We served in the same unit for 6 months back in Iraq. I told him everything, and when I got to the part about the rifles and the threats to kill livestock, he went dead silent. You've got that on video? Every second. Send it to me. I'll be there in 24 hours. Sure enough, the next day, a black and white rolled up my driveway and out stepped Sheriff Evers, hat in hand, frown on his face. Mason, he said, this is a powder keg. These HOA people are nuts. I've had 4 calls about Karen in the last 6 months, but no one had proof. Now we do. What can we do? Not much. Not yet. But we can prepare. He filed a formal complaint with the county, opened a case for armed civilian trespassing, and most importantly, flagged the Whispering Pines HOA with a warning notice. It was a small step, but it was the first one. Still, I wasn't content to wait. I wanted the HOA to know I was watching. So I did what Karen would never expect. I went to a board meeting. I walked through the gates of Whispering Pines, down the cobblestone path, past the spa and the wine bar, and stepped into their pristine little clubhouse. The board was seated in a circle, Karen at the head, wearing a blazer like she was running for governor. The moment she saw me, her jaw tightened. Mr. Brooks, she said through gritted teeth. To what do we owe the surprise? I smiled and dropped a thick manila folder on the table in front of her. Just thought I'd return the favor, I said. You came to my house. I figured I'd come to yours. She didn't open the folder, but her fingers twitched. You're not a member of this HOA. This meeting is private. Not when your organization is under investigation, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Trespassing. Armed intimidation. Financial misconduct. Oh, and wire fraud too. You should really read your own invoices. There was silence. Then murmurs. One of the board members leaned over and whispered to Karen. She slapped his hand away. I turned to leave, but not before saying, enjoy the rest of your meeting. And next time you think about stepping foot on my land, you'd better bring a warrant. Not a clipboard. The whispers turned into open discussion as I walked out. I didn't look back. That night, I got a call from an unknown number. I picked up. A man's voice, gruff and nervous. She's planning something. Bigger. The raid was just a test. She's pushing for a full-scale, community cleansing protocol. That includes you. And your ranch. I didn't ask who it was. I just said thank you and hung up. Because I already knew what was coming next. And this time, I was going to let her walk straight into my trap. The trap wasn't going to build itself, and if I wanted Karen to step into it with both heels snapping like she was stomping on ants, I had to set the bait just right. I didn't want to just stop her. I wanted to dismantle her whole corrupt empire from the inside out and make sure every last member of her plastic little army scattered like roaches when the light came on. The first phase was exposure. She'd already made her move in the open, storming my ranch with her private militia, but now it was time for me to work in the shadows. I started with surveillance. Real surveillance. Not the kind you get off Amazon and slap on a porch. I still had my old field kits tucked away in a sealed crate in the basement. Night vision drones, thermal imaging cams, high-gain audio recorders, military grade, old but more than effective. I planted cameras on the fence line that pointed back toward the HOA clubhouse. Not on their land, mind you, just enough angle to catch who was coming and going. What I started seeing was shocking, even for someone as jaded as me. Night meetings with full tactical gear rehearsals. Karen pacing in front of her, officers like some HOA Napoleon pointing at a whiteboard where my name was circled in red marker. They weren't pretending anymore. This wasn't about citations. This was preparation for an all-out assault. They called it Operation Restore Order. Their plan was detailed, too detailed for people who weren't supposed to have authority beyond grass length and mailbox colors. They had drawn-up routes, extraction points, and a sequence that involved rapid containment, animal removal, and this part made me grind my teeth, civilian detainment procedures. Civilian. That meant me. One guy even asked, do we need lethal? Karen waved it off with a smirk, but I saw the way she didn't say no. Meanwhile, I pushed the legal side harder. Reese, my lawyer buddy, had started sending subpoenas. Whispering Pines HOA was now knee-deep in litigation, forced to turn over every document related to their finances, property codes, and internal communications. But I wasn't just going after paperwork, I was planting seeds. See, I knew Karen's kind. The only thing they feared more than a challenge was losing control. And nothing makes a tyrant spiral faster than making them believe the people beneath them are starting to turn. So I fanned the flames. I started attending HOA-adjacent events, not inside their gate, but right outside it. Farmers markets, local vendors, open houses for nearby properties. When people asked what I thought of Whispering Pines, I told them the truth. Quietly. Matter-of-factly. I even printed flyers. Did you know? They started, followed by bullet points about the private militia, financial fraud, illegal enforcement actions, and screenshots from surveillance showing rifles and zip ties in the hands of people with no police authority. I left them under windshield wipers. I tucked them into mailbox flags. I paid a local teenager to slip them under doormats. And it worked. Slowly, I started hearing the ripple. HOA members whispering about military types showing up at meetings. Families concerned about where their fees were going. People asking if Karen had even been elected legally. Then came the pressure from the inside. Holly, the ex-board member who'd helped me, introduced me to 2 more defectors. Turns out Karen had bullied half her own board into silence through compliance fines and threats of property seizure. One man, a retired school teacher, had been fined $4,000 for unauthorized decorative plants. His crime? Daffodils? Yellow was apparently a non-approved color. I invited those folks out to the ranch. Not for any official meeting, just a cookout. Some good food, a few stories, a lot of truth. They started realizing what I had known for weeks. Karen wasn't running an HOA. She was running a racket. But the final nail in the coffin came from a source I never expected. One night, just past midnight, I got a knock on my door. Not a frantic knock, not the kind of knock that signals trouble. This was deliberate. Controlled. I opened the door to find one of Karen's so-called compliance officers standing there, helmet off, hands up. His name was Richie. About 30, maybe ex-military, maybe just cosplaying it. He didn't even wait to be invited in. I need to talk, he said. You got 30 seconds, I replied, not moving. Karen's gonna do it, he said. She's got a date picked. Next weekend. Says she's calling it a final compliance action. Wants to roll onto your land again, this time with pre-filled eviction orders and county-looking paperwork she printed herself. Says the last time didn't work because she didn't go far enough. My jaw tightened. Why tell me? He looked down. Because she's crazy, man. I signed up for this because I thought we were doing good, keeping things organized, stopping crime. Then I realized I'm standing in a field pointing a gun at a man's dog because his barn smells like hay. That's not who I am. I believed him. Mostly. You got proof? I asked. Yeah, he said, and pulled out a flash drive. Everything. Her plan, her emails, even audio recordings. I wore a wire. Half those clowns don't even know it's illegal what they're doing. I took the drive. You just earned yourself a favor. Stay home next weekend. If you show up with her, I won't be so understanding. He nodded. Wouldn't blame you. And with that, he walked off into the night. The next morning, I got to work. I called Reese and told him to get the files submitted to the county sheriff and the state attorney general. He didn't even hesitate. Time to burn her down, he said. I prepped the ranch like a battlefield. Not with weapons, this wasn't about bullets, but with deterrence, documentation, and exposure. Every angle had a camera. I rigged the barn with security tripwires that triggered loud alarms. I mounted signs every 50 feet. Private property, trespassers will be prosecuted. I didn't need to fire a shot. I just needed Karen to step over the line again and let the system do the rest. But just in case the system didn't act fast enough, I also prepped a few legal surprises. A press release. A leaked video. A live stream setup buried in the tree line. I reached out to a local news outlet and tipped them off. Community militia plans armed seizure of veterans ranch. That headline practically wrote itself. Then I waited. I mowed the field. I fed the cows. I played fetch with Duke like it was just another peaceful week. All the while, the clock ticked down toward Karen's next big mistake. I didn't know exactly how she'd do it. I didn't know if she'd come in riding her army again, if she'd try to serve fake papers, or if she'd send in her division one by one. But I knew she was coming. Because people like Karen never stop. Not until you make them. And I was ready. It happened on a Saturday. Bright blue skies, not a cloud in sight, and the kind of windless silence that made even the cows uneasy. I was out in the pasture early, tossing hay and pretending to be unbothered, but my senses were dialed to 11. I had 2 full thermoses of coffee, a sidearm holstered under my coat, not to use, but just to keep old instincts warm, and every camera, motion sensor, and recorder on my land running hot. I knew she'd come. Hell, she told me through her actions, her planning, her endless flexing of fake authority. Karen Whitmore didn't just want me gone. She wanted me humiliated, stripped of dignity, marched off my own land like some backwoods squatter. This wasn't about property lines anymore. This was about dominance. Her HOA kingdom had been cracking thanks to my pressure campaign and the mountain of evidence I dumped on her doorstep. But wounded tyrants are always the most dangerous. And just past 9 a.m. I heard the engines. First, the familiar roar of motorcycles, 8 this time, not 10. Then came the black Escalade, likely borrowed from the community vehicle fund she pilfered from HOA dues. And finally, bringing up the rear, 2 box trucks with the HOA logo painted in shaky vinyl letters and what looked suspiciously like animal trailers hitched behind them. I was standing at my porch when they rolled up to the front gate. She made no effort to hide this one. Karen wanted an audience. She brought one. A dozen HOA members stood behind the gate, cell phones out, dressed in windbreakers and khakis, watching like this was a tailgate party. Some of them were recording, probably thinking they'd capture the moment I was carted off in handcuffs. But the cameras were already watching them, my cameras. Drone-mounted, high-res, streaming to the cloud and backed up on hard drives buried deeper than a prairie dog's nest. I didn't bother to speak first. Karen strutted forward in boots that had never touched mud, her hair lacquered into something stiff enough to deflect bullets. She held a thick folder, printed papers fluttering in the breeze, and behind her were 2 of her goons, one of whom I recognized from last time, the other new, younger, and jittery. "Mr. Brooks," she said loudly for the benefit of the onlookers. "You are once again in violation of Whispering Pines Homeowners Association health and aesthetic codes. You have refused all previous offers to mediate and have ignored multiple enforcement actions. Therefore, by authority vested in me by the community charter, I am placing this property under emergency custodianship." She handed a sheet to her armed goon, who began unlocking the gate with bolt cutters. The crowd gasped with excitement. "I let them." "Those aren't legal documents," I said. "You printed the garbage in your clubhouse break room." "They are binding," she snapped. "Under HOA Statute 14C, I can detain and remove any person who refuses mandated compliance." I raised my hand slowly and gave the signal. It looked like nothing, just a tap to my right earpiece, but it activated 3 different systems. The drones took off from the barn roof. The PA system kicked on with a heavy reverb, and my lawyer, Reese, standing by in a nearby trailer, hit play on the livestream. "This is Mason Brooks," I said, my voice echoing across the field from the speakers. "I am the legal and sole owner of this property. Any attempt to enter beyond this point will be considered criminal trespassing, armed intimidation, and violation of multiple state and federal statutes, all of which are currently being monitored by law enforcement and broadcast live." Karen's smirk twitched. "You think scaring us with gadgets is going to Karen Whitmore?" I interrupted. "I'd like to introduce you to some people." A side gate opened and out stepped Sheriff Evers, 2 deputies, and a woman in a business suit holding a clipboard of her own. "That's Sheriff John Evers of Clay County," I said, "and beside him is Deputy State Attorney Monica Kellerman, here on behalf of the Department of Consumer Protection and the Attorney General's office. They've reviewed your documentation. They've seen the raid footage. And they're very interested in your compliance division." Karen paled. Her sunglasses slipped an inch down her nose as she tried to maintain composure. This is a private enforcement action under civil authority, actually," Kellerman said, stepping forward and unrolling her own set of papers. "You are operating a paramilitary unit under the pretense of a non-profit neighborhood association. That includes unlicensed weapons, impersonation of law enforcement, and unlawful detention planning." She turned to the goons. "You gentlemen may want to drop your weapons right now." One complied immediately, the younger one. The other hesitated until 2 deputies stepped forward with hands on their holsters. He dropped it. The clatter of that rifle on the gravel sounded like justice. Karen sputtered, reaching for her megaphone, but the sheriff beat her to the punch. "Ma'am," he said, "you are under investigation for racketeering, fraud, criminal trespass, and multiple violations of state HOA code enforcement laws. You're not under arrest yet, but I suggest you step away from the property and stop talking." "This is a setup," she hissed. "He's manipulating the system. He's a trained killer." "You're damn right I am," I said, stepping forward, "but I never pointed a gun at your house. You brought that game here, and now you're going to pay for it." Her voice cracked. "I was trying to protect the community. By forming a militia? By forging warrants? By threatening to kill animals on a live stream?" I waved toward the drones still buzzing overhead. "Because that's what's been playing for the last 10 minutes to over 5,000 viewers. Including the governor's office. Including the board of your HOA. Including your real estate license review board." One of the HOA members in the crowd dropped his phone. Another turned and walked away in silence. And then came the final act. Sheriff Evers turned to me and said, "Mr. Brooks, do you have a formal complaint to file?" "I do," I said, and handed him a folder nearly an inch thick. Inside, trespass photos, financial statements, emails from whistleblowers, audio recordings, maps, and more. "I'd like to file for a restraining order against the Whispering Pines HOA and its president, plus seek restitution for damages incurred during 2 illegal enforcement raids." "Consider it accepted," Evers said, and turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, you need to leave this property now." She stood there, trembling, hands at her sides, defeated in front of the very people she had tried to impress. Her reign ended not with a bang, but with the crunch of her boots turning away in the gravel. The Escalade rolled back out the gate, followed by the motorcycles and the box trucks that had come to steal my land. One by one, they disappeared down the dirt road until the only sound left was the wind across the grass. I stood there for a long time. Then I walked back to the porch, Duke trotting beside me. I poured myself a cup of coffee, still warm in the thermos. Took a sip, and smiled. In the days that followed, it all unraveled for her. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove her. The community, those who once feared her, came together to dissolve the Whispering Pines HOA entirely. Turns out most of them hated the fines, the rules, the surveillance, but no one had dared to fight until I showed them how. The clubhouse was shut down. The fake compliance division was disbanded. Karen's real estate license was suspended. A formal investigation into Clearwater habitat management opened, and more charges piled up than she had rules in her bylaws. Her house went up for sale within a month, and rumor had it she fled to another state to start over. Good luck with that. As for me, the ranch is quiet again. The horses roam free, the cows are back to grazing without flashbangs going off in the background, and Duke naps in the sun like nothing ever happened. I've been asked to run for local office, to serve on agricultural boards, even to help other communities deal with tyrannical HOAs. I haven't decided yet. For now, I'm just enjoying the peace. Because there's a certain kind of satisfaction in knowing you didn't just beat the bully, you made sure she'd never bully anyone again. The land's mine. The silence is mine. And Karen? She's just a cautionary tale whispered by suburbanites whenever someone mentions painting a fence the wrong color.